So, thanks everyone. I'm Jiang. So today we are starting to share about how we steal the PRT cookie on macOS and use the PRT cookie persistent in Entra ID. That's a very funny fact is we realize Microsoft implementation on macOS for a PRT cookie is more security implementation than on Windows. So I will starting first, and I will hand over to the down speaker. I'm Jiang. I'm the Director of Research at SiteCraft, and I have a blog called Hacker Peanuts Jiang. And I'm a researcher, so of course, I'm speaking at several conferences, but it's my first time in DevCon. So let's jumping out to today's topic. Because Microsoft has a lot of different types of service, maybe 100 or 200. And if we don't want our computer asking the password again and again, we need to ask our computer single sign-on to help us single sign-on to this service. You can log in all of them using the Entra ID account, or we call consumer side, we call Microsoft account. So you can use this account to do a single sign-on. But how does it work? This is how it works when Windows generates an SSL token for your browser. I will explain about Windows part, and later customer will introduce about the macOS part. There's a two component, LSAS, which is handle the authentication process. And there's inside LSAS, there's a plugin called Cloud AP. Cloud AP will interact with the TPM, which is Trust Platform Module. The TPM is designed for make sure the private key and secret key never leave on this device. And then there's a two element stored in the TPMs. PRT, primary refresh token, represent the user identity. And the session key is a device identity. So if we have a PRT, we can exchange everything we want. But by the design, the PRT will not directly single out the TPM. We need to calculate the PRT to the PRT cookie. The PRT cookie only has 50 minutes lifetime. And we can use the PRT cookie to do a token exchange to the refresh token and access token. The max lifetime is 24 hours. And then we can use the access token to log in the cloud service. And here is how it goes in detailed process in the Windows system. There's a browser like Edge, Chrome, Firefox. They can have pass a nonce to the browser code, which is building binary inside Windows. And the browser code will interact with Microsoft Account Token Provider, DLL, and send the request to LSAS process. LSAS process will calculate the PRT cookie sent to the browser. And in this process, there's these three ways to abuse the process and get a PRT cookie. First is the raw tools, and the second is request AD refresh token, and the bad AD token broker. They are leverage a different stage and abuse. Until today, they can still get the PRT cookie from the Windows system. The PRT cookie will encode some information very important for us, like a user identity and the link device information. Which means if we have a PRT cookie from a device, usually we can get the MFA claim and the device claim, which means I'm coming from user A, I'm coming from a trust device, and I'm complying some requirement. It can help us pass some conditional access policy check. So it's why stealing a PRT cookie is so valuable. Here is our today's objective. We will steal the PRT cookie from macOS because Windows already researched it, but the macOS are not. But the PRT cookie only has a short-term lifetime, so we want to long-term persistence and compile some security requirement for the conditional access policy and the access critical resource. And now I will hand over to the customer to introduce macOS part.
Thanks, John, for the great overview. And welcome everyone to the wonderful world of Apple. Today, in my session, I'm going to talk about how do we steal the macOS PRT cookie. Before we dive in, let me introduce myself first. My name is Cosma Yet. but feel free to just call me Kazma. And I'm a university student from Taiwan, and also I'm a CDL player. For the past few years, I've been leading a pretty active team called Beef Soup, and we've managed to bring home quite a few trophies along the way. Recently, I'm just transitioned from the intern to researcher at Cycraft Technology. So I'm still learning a lot every day, and I'm really appreciate the chance to be here and share this research with all of you. So let's dive in with one question. Why do we research still the macOS PRT cookies? Today, many organizations rely on Intune as their MDM solution for both Windows and macOS. And with conditional access now extending to the macOS part, zero trust policy is no longer just a Windows story. But here's the thing. Most research and detection still focus on the Windows, and macOS, on the other hand, remain largely unexplored. And of course, Dirk Yang and Olaf research on the macOS was a huge inspiration for us and gave us a solid starting point. From there, we decided to dive deeper into how macOS handles the PRT cookies, and more importantly, where the weaknesses are. So if we want to steal the macOS PRT cookie, we must enroll our macOS device into Entra ID first. And according to the Microsoft official documentation, we can see that it needs us to download and use in this Company Portal app. And the Company Portal app has two main parts. On the left, you can see its Intune-related part for device management. But what we really care about here is on the right. This is where even like the macOS apps and even Safari go through its SSL extension for you need to do the single sign-on thing to the Entra ID. And it used to be called Platform SSL, but as we all know, Microsoft loves to rename things, so it's no longer the name. And now let me put out some components that are related to the SSL part in the Company Portal. There are two main plugins, and one is the SSL extension, what we mentioned earlier, and it used to be called Platform SSL extension. And the other one starts with the autofill, which we are now going to cover today. Also, we can see there's a framework under the SSL extension called the AD Authentication Broker macOS. And this is the library most performing mode for the caller validation checks. And a framework on the macOS is kind of like DL on the Windows. Both provide libraries, but a framework on the macOS contains more bundle resources. But it's pretty much the same concept though. Also, at the same time, we can see there's browser core under the resources folder, which also appeared earlier in the Windows SSL floor. And earlier in Jiang's session, we can see that the browser core is playing a key role handling SSL requests initiated by the Google Chrome. So as we saw that Company Portal also has this app, is browser core, we immediately suspect it might serve a similar purpose for handling SSL requests on macOS as well. So to help visualize the comparison, I put together the macOS diagram from the Windows one. We can see that Apple provides App SSL agent to do the SSL part, handle requests from different vendors. But this diagram is a little simplifier. Actually, it has authentication framework to offer API and do the front end part. And the App SSL agent is just doing the back end part, but it's easier to understand that. And macOS doesn't have LSASS, so the component responsible for computing the final PRT cookie is the SSL extension under the Company Portal. And any request passed into the Company Portal will go through its AD authentication framework to do the caller validation checks. And after we have a basic understanding of the macOS ecosystem, now let's summarize what we have found. Totally, we found 3 methods to steal the macOS PRT cookie. Next, I'll walk you through each of them and explain how they work. The first one is head browser-based method. The first one is pretty straightforward, but Microsoft provides us this extension called Microsoft SSL Chrome extension. and we can just initiate an SSO request and directly retrieve the output there. So when we compromise a macOS device, we can just initiate an headless browser and install this extension, and then we can initiate an SSO request and get the PRT cookie right away. And from the logs, we can also confirm that a browser core is handling the SSO request, playing the key role in the SSO flow, like the Windows one. But this method does come with some limitations, is that we need the victim to be logged in into their desktop session. Because headless browser doesn't mean there's no GUI dependencies. It's more like a transparent browser running in the background. So we need it to log in their session. And also, there's also another limitation, is that this technique only works with official Chrome and Microsoft Edge. And we'll know why when we get to the third method. So to wrap up the first method, we found that this first method has specific dependencies. But of course, we won't satisfy with just that. Next, we'll move to the second one. The bypass browser core's parent process check. So after some reverse engineering of the browser core, we found that whenever the browser core needs to check its coder, it will first call running application with process identifier leaks function and get the parent process info. And then it will concatenate, like it can get the PID from the info and concatenate cosine HDV to execute this command and get bundle ID and team ID. Also, when it has these two values, it will concatenate it and hash it and check against the internal whitelist. And here's the fun part, is that until very late our research, we found that this running application function only works with the .app process. So later in our POC, you will see that we package the whole script into a .app process. And here you might find some terms that are unfamiliar with, which is team ID and the bundle ID. And let me explain them quickly. The team ID is the identifier included in the certificate issued by Apple to each developer. So only the developer owns the certificate can sign the app with their own team ID. But bundle ID, on the other hand, is just a string for identification. It has no real security value, so we can change it to whatever we want. In short, attacker can fake the bundle ID, but team ID doesn't. Also, we can find that there are some similar mechanism on the Windows 4. It's called security identifier, or somebody call it SID. In this flow, we can see that security identifier is more like a bundle ID is just for identification. So we can also change it to whatever we want. And this is interesting because that Microsoft never implements something like the team ID on their operating system. So they check this security identifier is a bit pointless. And also, we found that this SSO flow involves a lot of components, and that means a lot of coders. And more coders means more coder validation checks. So let me clear things up and focus on the most two important one. The first one is the coder of the browser core. And of course, as the name suggests, is the browser. And in this case, it can be the Google Chrome or Microsoft Edge. And also, it is the parent in the parent process check in our earlier talk. And this is what we have mentioned. We are mentioned about it here in the diagram. This is the part like the Google Chrome call into the browser core. So let me read up the attack strategy. First, we create a payload.binary. And second, we have a fake cosine and put it in the /tmp directly. And we have it use the bundle ID for Google Chrome and the team ID. Also, we package the whole process into a .app process, and that the browser core can retrieve the parent process info since the running application function. And here's the real problem, is that browser core runs this cosine HDV function just without the absolute path. So we can use path intersection to change the environment variable to /tmp to let it run the fake one instead of the real one. And here's the screenshot of our POC. And this execution is quite instant, so running it showing a video will be kind of funny. But we will release this tool at the end of our talk. And let me share some little funny story here. At first, when we try to do the second method, we first do the patch the browser core. And when we run it from the terminal, we found it running an error. Caller is not allowed to invoke with an error code is -6000. So we decided to use the LDB to dynamic debug it. And to our surprise, we just get the PRT cookie right here. So that led us to dig into what happened behind the scenes. And from the logs, we can see that in the fail run, it can retrieve the bundle ID and team ID. And the component responsible for this function is app SSL agent. So later, we started to analyzing it, and we found that the key point is that whenever app SSL agent need to retrieve the process team ID and the bundle ID, it will check if it has CS value flag or the CS debug flag. So let's explain everything, because earlier when we patched the browser core, that the CS value flag became false. And when we attach it with the LDB, the CS debug flag was true. Somebody will think that maybe LDB can be one of our methods to get a PRT cookie, but actually we think about that too, but it needs us to disable the system integrated protection, and also we need to use Touch ID or the password to pass the developer tools access prompt. So if we want to use it with LDB, we must need some extra privilege escalation. So we want to find some method just in the user privilege. And here comes the second caller. It's called caller of the app SSL agent. And in this case, it's browser core. Also, it can be other vendors' helper tool. And whenever you are the coder to call app SSL agent, you need this CS value flag or the CS debug flag to that app SSL agent to retrieve your team ID or bundle ID. And this is what we are talking right now. Is the browser core calling to the app SSL agent part here. So to wrap up the second method, this method can run without any dependency, and also it can run in the user privilege. So that little LDB twist story make us dig into the ID authentication framework, and we found that this browser core method is just the tip of the iceberg. Actually, we found that there are 4 paths for the SSL, and that led us to the third method. Direct SSL invocation via the Apple's API. And this SSL method, the first one is browser native message. This is the same route of the browser core. And the second one is passkey credential operation. And these two methods checks bundle ID and the team ID. So there's no problem with that. But the problem is there are 2 paths not check the team ID at all. It's the general SSL extension request. This is mainly used by the Microsoft apps like the PowerPoint, Outlook, Teams, Excel, something like that. And there are also cookie SSL acquisition is for the third-party apps like the Firefox or the Opera. And like the cookie SSL one, this bundle ID whitelist is contains for 3 subsets. It's like Edge bundle IDs, third-party browser bundle IDs, non-native browser bundle IDs. In totally, there are 39 bundle IDs. And if it only checks the bundle IDs, what we need to do here is only pick anything we like. And just like that, we can also get the PRT cookie right here. And this tool will also, like the second one, releasing at the end of our talk. So to wrap up the third method, we can also see that it can run without any dependencies and also run in the user privilege. So here in my session, I'm successfully make the PRT cookie thief into a reality. But here's some problem. PRT cookies only survive for about 15 minutes-ish. And how can we achieve persistence and keep the attack going?
So, how can we achieve persistence? Before we started, allow me to first introduce myself. My name is Echo. I'm also a cloud security researcher at Cycraft. I have presented in multiple security conferences such as RuCon and FIRST, and most of my research focus on cloud security. So back to our subject, why do we need persistence? As Cosma said, PRT cookie is only validated for a few minutes. However, the core reason of this question is that we don't have the TPM, the PRT and the session key is stored in the hardware, which as an adversary, we cannot access it even we have the administrative privileges. So how do we achieve persistence? A general solution is to abuse the device join scenarios. Attacker, by registering a new device, they can have their own PRT and session key, so they can generate their own PRT cookie continuously whenever they need it. However, by registering a new device, we can not only achieve persistence, we could also bypass some conditional access policies. However, registering a device has a requirement that it requires an access token without device ID. And which means we cannot use the stolen PRT cookie from a device to register another device. And as I just said, we also want to bypass conditional access policy. And the most common conditional access policy is to require multi-factor authentication. However, token issued through passwordless authentication also contain the MFA claim. And sometimes conditional access has a stricter policy, such as it requires passwordless authentication or phishing-resistant authentication, such as Windows Hello for Business or FIDO. So we also want to register our own Windows Hello for Business key, or platform credential on macOS, which is basically the same thing for Entra, but just different name on different OS systems. And however, registering a new Windows Hello for Business key requires an access token that contains something called an NGC MFA claim, which stands for Next Generation Credential Multi-Factor Authentication. And to have an access token with NGC MFA claim, you have to pass the MFA authentication again. And then within the last 10 minutes, the token will be validated, and you will be able to register a new Windows Hello for Business key. Well, long story short, you can consider NGC MFA claim as something as a fresh MFA status, which prevent adversary from stealing access token containing a cache MFA status to register a new Windows Hello for Business key. And another common conditional access policy is to require device to be marked as compliant. And this could be achieved by Intune that is released last year in Black Hat Europe. And however, Intune does not support macOS for now. Okay, so here is our persistence flows. First, we get a token without device ID. Then we find a way to re-authenticate via multi-factor authentication, register a new device, and make the device compliant, then register a new Windows Hello for Business key. And the step 3 and step 5 can be done by direct install rule tool, and the step 4 device compliance can be done by US Trudeau's project, Intune. So the true difficulty of our persistent flow lies on the initial step, which we cannot use a stolen PRT cookie with a cache MFA status to get a token without device ID and a token with NGC MFA claim. And this problem does not exist in the past since Microsoft fixed them all. And we can no longer use the single sign token for device registration, and the MFA claim would not transfer to the PRT after registration. And there are some other topics we are not mentioning here, but if you are interested in this topic, feel free to, I highly recommend you to read the Recurrence blog post. So how do we get a token without device ID? Well, it is easy for a legitimate user to do it, since they just need to enter their clear text password and on a non-single sign-on device. However, it is difficult, a challenge for our adversary, since even if we compromise the victim's device, we don't know their clear text password. And so a common technique to get a token without device ID is through phishing. And the upside of phishing is that it does not require compromising the device. It just needs to convince the user to enter their credential. And the downside of it is that phishing is unreliable. So since in our scenario would already compromise a device, we suggest another approach, which is abusing Kerberos seamless single sign-on. The upside of it is that it keeps the noise level low. You don't need to modify with the authentication methods. You just need a service ticket in exchange for an access token. And the downside of it is that only less than 25% of tenants have this setting enabled. And it could only abuse on Windows system that is hybrid joined. So we start thinking that could we just simply reset the victim's password? And the upside of it is obvious. It could use across all operating systems regardless of its join type. And the downside of it is that resetting the password may trigger some alerts. But the biggest problem here is that could we reset password without knowing the current one? Well, if we look into the My Sign service of Microsoft and try to log in with an access token contains password and MFA claim, then we can reset the password directly without knowing the original one. And in this case, we will call the API password reset. However, if we log in with passwordless authentication, it only contains MFA claim. So we have to enter the current password since we don't have the password claim in our access token. And in this case, it will call the API password change. So of course, as adversary, we tend to abuse API password reset. But it seems this abuse is limited to passwords authentication user, not passwordless authentication user. But this is not true. And we found out there is inconsistent logic between the front-end and back-end logic of the MySign service. Actually, calling API password reset only requires the MFA claim. The password claim is not required. So we could also reset a password on passwordless authentication user without knowing their current password. And something need to notice that we can always reset a password without considering the SSPR, self-service password reset, is enabled or not. So we can always reset user's password. And our last approach is adding a passkey in Microsoft Authenticator or your mobile device. And the upside of it is keep the noise level low. You add a new authentication method without modifying the old one. And since passkey is a passwordless authentication via FIDO, you also get a token with MFA claim. The only downside of it is that it requires user interaction with your browser and your mobile device, since you need to store your passkey in your mobile device. And however, you may consider that adding a passkey is some sort of MFA bypass. Well, it's not entirely correct, but it's not easy we get an access token with an MFA claim. Is there something that I didn't mention? Other requirements? Let's talk about how do we find a way to re-authenticate via multi-factor authentication. So, as we said, general solution, if we try to reset the password, we have to know the current password. But we know in the last step, Microsoft kind of like screwed up. But they did better protection for Windows Hello for Business, as it requires a fresh MFA to add a new Windows Hello for Business key. However, if we just try to register a new MFA method or a single multi-factor authentication, such as a passkey or TP key, we don't need a fresh MFA token, which means we could use the stolen PRT to add a new one. And that makes the NGC MFA protection useless, since attacker can register their own MFA to bypass the NGC MFA protection. So the NGC MFA protection is a good idea. However, its actual implement is flawed, just like this French fries in the door. Yeah. So interesting thing is we report to Microsoft and with the title MFA bypass. And they respond us that they determine this is not a vulnerability and claim that MFA bypass is a hyperhole. We agree with them since we have to have a PRT cookie with a cache MFA status. However, this is not an MFA bypass. Accurately, this is a next generation credential MFA bypass, which make it sound like even worse. So It seems to imply that Microsoft forbid us from using stolen device credential, which is our PRT cookie, to directly register a new device. However, if we multiply the authentication info first and then register a new device, and Microsoft seems to be OK with it. So we think it's unreasonable, but we accept the result. And however, Microsoft changed their mind in like July 30, and after we provide them with our slide with this picture on it. So they determined that they have to provide stronger authentication in the future, such as fresh MFA, to better protect the MySign service. And John will talk about the detail first, but I will rather show you the demo. So, OK. Here is our attack chain. We'll first request a PRT cookie directly to a single sign invocation by Apple API. And then we'll abuse the device join scenario. First, we'll reset the password, get a token without device ID, register a fake new device, add MFA, and register a new Windows Hello for Business key. And we skip the device compliance part for shorten the demo. And if the device registration requires multi-factor authentication, you just need to switch the step. Just add the MFA before we register the fake device. So here is our demo. OK. First, we need to check our compliance policy, our conditional access policy. It requires our user to pass multi-factor authentication to access to all target resource. Then we are looking at the victim's device, which is a macOS system. And we know our victim's name is called Adele. And we request for a nows and request for a PRT cookie. Then we pass the PRT cookie from macOS to our attacker's machine. And we exchange for a MySign service token. And since we don't know the victim's password, we need to reset it to have a new one. Now we try to call the API password reset to get a new password. OK. Now the password is reset successfully. OK. Then since it's we can register our new device with our new password. And that successfully, so we try to log into Office 365 with our new password and our username. And now we are blocked by the multi-factor authentication. So we'll try to steal the PRT cookie again and add a new multi-factor authentication. And this time we'll not done by direct API call. We will open up the browser so that it's more easy to understand. OK, we log into the MySign service website and try to add a new MFA. OK. And in this process, we'll try to add our TOTP key into the key path. And Microsoft will access to verify it again. OK, now we successfully add our new MFA without prompting out another authentication. Now, we'll try to register our new Windows Hello for Business key. But we need a token with NGC MFA claim. So we need to pass the MFA again and check our access token. It actually contains NGC MFA token claim. Yeah. OK, now we got our own Windows Hello for Business key, and we try to log in on our new device with the Windows Hello for Business key. Now we successfully log into the Office 365 and bypass the multi-factor authentication. And finally, we check our authentication method. And we register a new Windows Hello for Business key on our demo machine, which does not physically exist. And this is all for our demo. And OK. And if you like it, feel free to give us some applause. Thank you.
Okay, thanks Echo for demonstration. So let me wrap up what I just saw. In this demonstration, actually we got a PRT and a very strong MFA, just like Microsoft said, they love the Windows Hello for Business. Yeah, so you have a strong MFA, and all this condition the element is coming from the fake device. So we are not just accessing the cloud resource, but also if we have a PRT, we can lateral movement between the Entra ID joint device. This is a talk in this year in Troopers has mentioned about how to lateral movement in Entra ID joint device. By default setting, global administrator and Intune administrator and the device owner are local admin in Entra ID joint device. So you can use the PRT, exchange it to the P2P certificate, and the login in Entra ID joint device. You just saw a demo, and you might think, if you are familiar with conditional access policy, you might think, hey, why require the MFA for joint device, and I require MFA for update their security information? Actually, it's not enough, and you might encounter some deadlock problem in this scenario. I just shared with my friend this attack method, and he just applied the conditional access policy, and he encountered some problem. If you have a new employee onboarding, you just give them their password and the account name. They just log in. The first time log in, they don't have MFA. Entra ID asking, hey, you need the MFA, but you have to pass the MFA first. So they encounter some problem. The new employee cannot add their own MFA. So the only way to escape out is on the documentation. For the Microsoft, you need to log in with the tab for the initial login. This is the only way to escape out in this deadlock situation. If you apply this conditional access policy, actually it's not enough. Just in case you didn't film the video, so I prepare a diagram for the easy to understand whole attack path. We assume we have compromised Intune or Windows Hello for Business device. We extract the PRT cookie with MFA. And then we have two things need to do. First, add a new MFA. The conditional access require us need to pass MFA first and add in the new MFA. But we already have MFA claim, so we can easily satisfy its policy check. And on the reset password, we just want to add our fake device. So we can change the user password without we don't know the current password. It's a UI inconsistency in the front end and back end. We are easy to get the new MFA and control the user password. And now we can persistence in Entra ID. We can register a new device. And then trying to register device, you still require MFA. But we already add our own MFA, so we can easily satisfy its policy check too. And then we can upgrade our fake device to Windows Hello for Business. We can easily authenticate MFA in 5 minutes. And then persistence in Entra ID. How Microsoft responds to us our finding. That's very interesting because Microsoft for the macOS PRT cookie, they already fixed. But for the Windows side, they never fix it. It still can get a PRT cookie on Windows, but now it's not on the macOS. And for the Entra ID persistent method, the first time the response, you have to compromise someone Windows. Maybe very hard, right? But they just 1 week ago, they know, oh, we are speaking at DEF CON. They decide to fix it. Maybe 1 month or 1 week later, they will fix it. It also has a recommendation for the macOS cookie PRT safe. Just update. If you cannot update yet, you can just monitor following criteria, like a call sign. It should be always running on the user bin folder. And monitor the header browser. If there is a binary, has a bundle ID we mentioned today, but there is a binary don't have the enough validate signature, just trigger alert. Also, even Microsoft implement this update, but you should check your Intune's policy, because if you whitelist some bundle ID, you still encounter some problem. You still possibly get the PRT cookie sieve on your macOS system. And here is a summary. We found that a PRT cookie sieve on macOS now is a reality. And we've also noticed other vendors, not just Microsoft, other vendors has implemented the SSO extension on macOS. We think they might have a similar problem. You are a macOS developer, you should choose a team ID, not bundle ID, to verify the binary. And before Microsoft really implement the patch, just pray for your endpoint never been compromised. And here is some mitigation for the persistent method. You can create the weak criteria from the conditional policy, like the IP location, user agent. Just make the attacker very hard to add a new device or add a new MFA. And then monitor the new join device and add a new MFA. If you have an employee add a new device, you can trigger alert, but it's kind of annoying. Yeah. And thanks, and here is our core release. You can check on this for macOS PRT cookie sieve, and thank you.